The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We are coming at you on October 10th, 2022. It's funny. Every day nowadays is just crazy. It feels like one step further into the abyss with the Biden administration. But fortunately, today we have a special guest that we wanted to bring you and an organization that their mission may even help us with some of these guys in bringing up all these bad ideas in Congress. And that's Kenn Quinn of the U.S. term limits. And he is the North Regional Director. But before we get to that, let me introduce you to the rest of our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom back with us. He is a pilot in the state of California, and that's Tim Everett. And my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host. In our upper right-hand corner, we have our special guest today, Kenn Quinn. So Kenn, term limits. I mean, that's it seems like a sort of an obvious thing to try and get some of these guys out of there who just seem to have, they show up with a lot of bad ideas, and the longer they're there, the worse their ideas get, I guess. So tell us a little bit about your organization and some of what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks for having me on your program, guys. I really appreciate it. Yeah, U.S. term limits. That's what we're working on. We're trying to get rid of these career politicians down in Washington, D.C. And I'll give you a quick overview real quickly. Back in the 1990s, our organization began, I think it was 1991. And back in the 90s, term limits was very popular with the American people. You might recall the Republicans running for Congress ran on the Contract for America. And one of the planks of that was getting term limits imposed on Congress. Well, long story short, that didn't happen. During that same period of time, 23 states passed laws. 21 of those, the people voted on at the ballot box. I live in Maine, and we voted on it twice, putting term limits on our own congressional delegations. And what happened was it got challenged in Arkansas, and it rose all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 1995, the case against us, it was U.S. term limits versus Thornton. The Supreme Court overruled all 23 state laws and said that the only way term limits can be imposed on Congress was through the amendment provision of Article 5. And for those of you that are not familiar with Article 5, there's only two ways an amendment can be proposed. You get 2/3 of both houses of Congress to pass the amendment, which is how we've had all of our 27 amendments proposed. Or the second option, which is what we're working on as well, is if we can get 2/3 of the state legislatures, and this is the beauty of this project, we can do this without the consent or approval of Congress. All we need is 2/3, 34 state legislatures to pass our application. It's called an Article 5 application for our single amendment or subject, which is term limits on Congress. Once we do that, Congress is forced to call the meeting. The states at that point, the legislatures will appoint their technical term is commissioners. They meet, they hammer out the amendments. They vote on it, pass it out. It's simple majority vote. So if all 50 states send commissioners, it only takes 26 states to pass it. And then it still has to go through the exact same ratification process if it was proposed by Congress, which is ratification by 3/4 of the states. And that has always, that typically would be through the state legislatures, but there's also a process that Congress could say, we would like to have the people ratify it through a state convention. And so both of those methods have been done in the past. The original Constitution was done through conventions by the people, as well as the 21st Amendment. So that's it in a nutshell, and that's what we're working on.
Well,
So
you mentioned, real
that's,
quick, I just wanted to add one thing. You mentioned thresholds that you guys were working on. How close do you guys think you are to hitting those thresholds?
Well, we have a long ways to go. We've had 5 states that have passed our application. We're working in a number of states. I cover the North, which I cover 15 states. And so we've been introducing this year, session after session. And so we're advancing this in close to 30 states every single year. And as they're dropping, we need to get to 34. So it's going to take some time. It's a marathon, but all good things like this do take some time. And now the beauty of this is once we do this, think about it. Once we can prove to the American people and the state legislatures that, hey, we can affect reforms at the federal level, it's going to open up opportunities for other great reforms that Congress refuses to introduce. They've been kicking the can on so many things that can be done through the amending provision that we'll see the flexing of some constitutional muscle by the states, and we can really change the direction of our country.
yes, and this is what philosophically it sounds great, but your main goal here is about term limits. If there's an Article 5 call of the Convention of the States, now does that open up the that convention for other amendments, or
Yeah.
do you deal specifically only with your term limit amendment?
Yeah, and this is where there's a lot of misinformation out there. The Article 5 process is very specific. It's limited to the 2/3 of the application. So it's limited to the subject that 2/3 of the states apply for. And so there's been over 400 applications submitted to Congress. And the reason a convention's never been called is because 2/3 have never concurred on the subject matter. So the Department of Justice back in the 1980s, if you read the Federalist Papers, the American Bar Association, they've all determined and ruled that this is a limited convention. You need 2/3 of the states to concur in the subject matter, and then that is all that can be addressed. Okay, so there's some misinformation, and there's actually groups out there that spew this misinformation to protect the establishment in order to maintain the status quo, and we'll be talking about maybe some of that.
Yes.
And so they want to cause confusion. And if you go to the website, I'll show later, this is very clear. The framers in their writings, they spoke about 2 types of conventions. One for a constitutional convention, which is to adopt a new constitution, which they voted on at the federal convention not to give Article 5 that power. So they removed that option off the table when they adopted the U.S. Constitution. All this process can do is simply give equal authority to the states to propose a single amendment. The whole purpose was to introduce a single amendment by the states.
Well, so James, real quick, can you pull up the webpage again? Because maybe there's something Ken wants to direct us toward here.
Yeah, if you go to termlimits.com over by facts, and if you go down to debunking myths against Article 5, we've addressed all this. If you click on that right there, you'll see these flashcards. And the first section is all about the Article 5 convention process, where I address a lot of these false claims. And I'm going to be honest with you. Let me give you a little bit of personal testimony. I used to believe that this was a constitutional convention that could rewrite the Constitution, and I would actually advocate against an Article 5 convention. But once I started doing my own research, I realized I was completely wrong. The information I was getting came from a group called the John Birch Society, which has been opposing this process for over 40 years now. And it's easily debunked if you just go back and read the framers themselves. And so that's part of the process of educating people on this. And that's one of my major goals in my role at U.S. Term Limits.
So philosophically, Ken, tell us, why do you think we as a country, this constitutional republic we have here, why do we need term limits?
Well, I'm a strong believer in liberty. And term limits, back in our founding, they used to call it rotation of office. And they saw limiting how long an individual could remain in office was the best way of protecting our liberty. I'd like to read to you real quickly the Declaration of Rights in the Constitution of Pennsylvania in 1776. Let me just read to you what it said there. This is Section 6, that those who are employed in the legislative and executive business of the state may be restrained from oppression. The people have a right at such periods as they may think proper to reduce their public officers to a private station. And Section 8 of their Constitution had rotation of office in it. So limiting how long somebody can remain in office is one of the best ways of protecting our liberty. And that's why this is so desperately needed, because right now, we're coming up on our election in November, and how many of us, election after election, think by voting things are going to change down in Washington, D.C., and nothing changes, because the ones who are in control are the people that have been there for decades. We're talking 30, 40, 50 years. They're the ones that control everything, and they refuse to introduce needed reforms, because once they get down... Now, listen, I don't think everyone that runs for Congress is corrupt. I think a lot of good people go there with good intentions. The system is corrupt. Once they get down there, we see very quickly that they become... I like to picture it as the Borg in Star Trek, where they become assimilated to the structure of DC. And it's a system that is dysfunctional. It's rigged to protect the incumbent party. And the only way of fixing it is by limiting how long these people can remain in their seats. Elections will not change a thing. We got to stop thinking that way. We have got to have, because we can never get enough people down there at the same time to affect change. We could, however, do that with term limits by having open seat and competitive elections. Wave after wave of new people arriving in DC will do wonders for our representatives and our voices being heard down there.
I know here we are talking about the power of incumbency and the complacency of the voter. Now, isn't it also true that the best term limits we have right now is our power to vote? And if so, why would we need a constitutional amendment to limit the terms of our public holders?
Yeah, no, the public vote has never been a good solution. In fact, there's a great letter by Thomas Jefferson when James Madison sent him a copy of the Constitution, because he wasn't there. He responded back to Madison, and he listed the things he liked about the new Constitution. Then he listed two things he hated about it, and he said, these are the things I really, really dislike. Number one, you did not include a Bill of Rights. Number two, you abandon rotation of office. And he goes on to say that if people are eligible to run for re-election, they will be officers for life, because the people will never vote them out. It's human nature. And that is what we cannot change at the ballot box. We cannot change human nature. We need a structural change to limit power. And we need to bring that power closer to the people. And the only way to do that, is by term limiting these individuals. There's no other option.
Well, it's funny, too, because certainly the preeminent politician that we all think about with the United States, George Washington, certainly believed in term limits, because he literally said, hey, I don't think I should be holding this office longer than first it was one term. And then I guess he agreed to eventually run for a second term.
Yes.
Over and over again, they debated this at the convention. It's too bad they did not include it. I don't know why they decided to put it out. A number of the framers at the convention wanted term limits. And it's been proven time and time again that power is abused when people have way too much of it and spend way too much time. Ben Franklin said, I have to find the quote, but there's two things: money and power. You give men opportunity to earn great wealth and power, they will move heaven and earth to obtain that. And that's what we have in Congress. And that's what term limits will help reduce. Not only will it help reduce the power that these people hold, but it'll help reduce the money that's given to them, because 97% of corporate PAC money goes to the incumbents. Why? Because they own them. right? That once they get them down there, they own those people. They no longer listen to the voters. There was a Princeton study showing that 80%, it doesn't matter if 80% of the American people want something, members of Congress do no longer listen to the people. They listen to their funders. And so this is also basically a way of campaign finance reform through this process, because the PACs and all the special interests, when you have new people showing up, they're not going to be spending as much money because they don't have any history with those individuals. And that's another benefit of term limits.
One of the things that occurred to me, hold on just a second, Leon. One of the things that's occurred to me over time as well with this whole issue of people being in office for a long time is the size and complexity of our government. I mean, you look at things like the tax code and other things, and it's just a ridiculous amount of material that we have to hire people in order to just understand what this stuff says. Yeah. And so, I mean, it occurs to me that the shorter the time these guys are in office, the less time they have to understand. I think, and make it more complicated. That's just a thought on my side. I don't know. Does that sort of ring true for you, Ken?
Well, yeah, it's ridiculous. These bills that they're passing, and what we need people. We need ordinary people. We need citizen legislators. We need people with different backgrounds showing up and putting fresh eyes on these problems. And until we get fresh eyes on the problems, nothing's going to get fixed. And the beauty of term limits will, as voters, think about it. Whenever there's an open seat election, most of the time, a lot of people will run for that seat. Okay, because now they have a real chance of winning. So we as voters have more options at the ballot box. And we also will have people with different backgrounds participating in our government. And that's what we need to infuse into our federal government. People with vast backgrounds to set fresh eyes on these problems to start fixing them. And without term limits, that simply is not going to happen, because so many good people don't even bother to run because they can't raise the millions to go up against the war chest that the incumbents have. And not to mention that, but the two parties protect the incumbents. If they've got somebody in office, no matter how bad they are, they're going to keep them there because they want that power. It's time to reduce power in DC, and this is the way we do it, by using the actual Constitution the framers gave us.
So when you say term limits, are we talking about lifetime term limits, or is it a term limits where an incumbent will have to sit out for 1 term or 2 terms or something like that? Is lifetime term limits we are speaking about?
Well, I'll address that as quickly as I can. Currently in Congress right now, we do have an amendment that was introduced by Senator Ted Cruz and I think Ralph Norman in the House. That is 2 terms for a U.S. Senator, 3 terms for a House member. So that's a total of 18 years. And then it's a lifetime ban. They could not go back for office. The issue I'm working on at the state level, the Article 5 convention, we did not specify number of terms nor the lifetime ban or consecutive. So we have left that open for discussion to let them decide. Okay, so that could be an option. In fact, here in Maine, we have term limits, but it's not a lifetime ban. It's more like a rotation where once they finish 8 years in the House, they could then run for the Senate. But they have to sit out before they can do that. But they could go back and forth after the sitting out 1 term. So that technically could be an option.
Does your one thing I want to add on to that, does your organization look to set term limits for any kind of high-level bureaucrats as well, or is this just for elected officers?
Right now, we are only focused at the federal level for members of Congress, just members of Congress. Yeah, we do sometimes get involved in local, state level initiatives to protect term limits. But our focus right now is nationally on Congress, and we're trying to advance it both ways through Article 5 through Congress. We have over 100 current members of Congress that have signed our pledge supporting this. And we have hundreds of candidates and legislators at the state office level promising to pass and vote for our resolution. So we are ramping up pressure both ways under Article 5 to get this done on behalf of the American people.
Ken, I can see philosophically, I can see why we need term limits. I mean, it really takes me a great leap to move away from the fact that I believe the vote of the public is more important and thus that should stay in place as the necessary term limits that we need. However, though, when we are talking about term limit on our legislators, whether they are the federal level or the state level, what about term limits on the legislation they pass? What about every piece of legislation that we have here in the United States has a date of an effective date? Why not also have a date of expiration and let it, if the legislation is so great and wonderful, it can be renewed by the body who is passing it. If Congress pass, say, take for instance Obama, this Obama care, whatever they call it, that was passed in 2009. Why should not that be open for renewal and debate after some period, maybe 12 years, 13 years? I don't know what that number would be. So what about term limits on legislation? Do you all guys ever get into that?
No, but you know what, Leon? I like the idea, and that should be an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I'll help you with that if you want to start a process. That's a great idea. That would make a great amendment, a sunset amendment where all federal legislation has to be renewed in order to stay in place. I love it.
I can tell you right away why they wouldn't want that, because it would mean they would have to understand it all.
Exactly. But that's a great amendment, isn't it? I love it. Or how about zero-based budgeting? Every 2 years, they got to start at zero, and then they have to defend. Why are we spending billions on this program? That, hey, what a great idea for an amendment, right?
Yes.
See, that's the beauty of this. There's so many great ideas. Let me just give you a little bit of history. This will blow you away, guys. Take a guess. We have 27 amendments have been ratified. Okay.
Yes.
Take a guess how many amendments have been simply introduced in Congress since 1789.
God.
Over 12,000.
Oh, wow.
In this Congress alone, the 117th, we're up to 67 amendments. Okay, all this now a lot of these are great amendments: term limits, balanced budget, limiting SCOTUS. A lot of these are great amendments, but good ideas don't ever pass out of Congress, right? So we can't get the 2/3 on those issues. Now, the states have never introduced a single amendment under Article 5. Think about that. We've only allowed Congress, and Congress can't even amend the Constitution. Only the states can amend it, and yet we're not allowing the states to propose. It makes absolute no sense. So for those people out there that claim they hold up the Constitution and they want to defend it, if you oppose this process, you're a hypocrite. You're an absolute hypocrite, because this is what the framers gave us to protect our liberties and our securities. It was the ultimate check against a runaway federal government. And that is what we have today. And it's time to start flexing some federalist muscle and use the process they gave us.
Tim, real quick, it looks like you're chomping at the bit to say something, and so I wanted you to get in if you wanted to say something.
Thanks. Yeah. Now I've had my moments, but they've passed pretty much. But I kind of
got a term limit on your ideas.
Exactly. Yeah. This time of the morning. Just. I like the idea, though. I'm kind of on board with that. Not that I've wavered in and out over the years, but anyway, yeah. What the heck? We're up against an insurmountable problem, obviously, with all this influence coming from the people with vested interests in the legislation that they're getting proposed for them from the people they put into positions of influence, like Congress and the Senate. So let's at least start over again once in a while. Maybe that's not such a bad idea.
I think the republic must be renewed constantly, and I think the way we renew it is by putting term limits on our legislators and also on the legislation that they pass. I really believe that's how our republic.
That's a wonderful amendment. I think that's great, Leon. You should start working on that puppy.
As if I don't have enough to do, Tim. Thank you, but
you're retired. You're retired.
Listen, like, Congress is not a swamp. It is a high-end hot tub where they wine and dine. And so we got to refresh that water on a regular basis.
Yes.
And that's what term limits will do. That's how we flush them out and replace it so it becomes closer to the voters.
Yeah, I'm not getting in that hot tub, especially right now.
Who knows what you might come away with?
Yeah, no kidding. No, they tell me not to go in a hot tub while I have this. Anyway.
Well, Kenn, real quick, before we're starting to get close to the end, and one of the questions I always like to get out of everybody who's on the show, and you mentioned that this is tied to your ideas in liberty, but real quick, how did you evolve to those ideas, real quick? Because for a lot of us, we are like, we go through state schools and it is not intuitive. So yeah, just what's your story?
Well, real quickly, I got involved in politics during the Tea Party effort. That's when I really dove deep into it. And long story short, I realized, man, all the hours I spent electing people didn't make much of a difference in DC. And so long story short, I was against Article 5 until I did my research. And once I realized this is the path we need to use, I became a strong advocate for it. And that's what I'm working on. In fact, you hear all the time this. The myth of a runaway convention is our runaway government reality. Okay. And so I put together this new YouTube channel to address a lot of the myths out there. And there's a gentleman going around. I don't know if he's still with the John Birch Society, but they're the most vocal opponents of an Article 5 convention, spreading a lot of lies. And so he's put out a $10,000 challenge to anyone that can produce one quote from a framer claiming they had the authority to propose the U.S. Constitution. It's unbelievable. And he actually has put a bounty of $10,000. So you know what? I'm stepping up and I'm claiming that bounty. And I'm going to be dropping another proof today. But I encourage your listeners and viewers to go to All Things Article 5, subscribe to my channel, and you are going to see this go down. And let's see how honest this individual is by paying me my 10 grand for proving him wrong.
Well, that's great. I like that.
We're almost at the end. So what I wanted to ask you now is any kind of future thoughts about what your organization is doing, and any last ideas or thoughts you want to leave everybody with as well.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I just ask people to please go to termlimits.com to learn more about this. If you're on the fence with the Article 5 process, I get that. I was there. I was you. But educate yourself. Look at other writings other than organizations that are constantly attacking the framers. Sign our petition. That way we'll keep you informed of where we are in your states. That really helps me as a regional when I send out information. And just talk to people. Share. Everybody wants this. 82% of the American people want this, and we've got to get this done. And it's across party lines. This is the one issue in America today that both sides can come together on. It's 87% Republicans and 83% Democrats. And so wouldn't it be nice, instead of fighting with one another, we can actually agree and come together on an issue that we can implement that will just provide other benefits for the country. And so I'm really encouraged by the support we're getting. I want to thank you for allowing me the few minutes to talk here, and I appreciate getting this information out for us.
Well, thanks so much too for joining us today. And if you're listening and you want to find out more, you go to termlimits.com, and also too, we'll have Kenn on another podcast kicking around some other election ideas with us as well soon. So check that out as well. Until then, stay free.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.